welcome back. Thanks for those of you who've been with us throughout the day. We have a couple more exciting sessions. So right now we're going to get talking about the future of entertainment, because a lot has changed in the last few weeks. And I mean, just by the numbers, I'll kind of tee us off before we have the guests introduce themselves. But Disney saw 50 million subscribers so far since our launch. Usage has been up on streaming devices over 40% in the last few weeks. Ad revenue is down, but needless to say, it's a time of transition. Let's have our guest introduce himself. Maybe Eunice, you can start.
Sure. Hi, I'm Eunice Shin, a partner at Profit. We're a consultancy focused across brand and growth and digital transformation. And my area of focus has been the media and entertainment industry, as well as direct to consumer. So excited to be here.
And Erik?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Erik Opeka. I'm the president of digital networks at Cinedigm. If you're not familiar with Cinedigm, we're a full service distribution company, and I run the division that operates OTT streaming channels. So we operate a portfolio of 15 different networks that range from everything from family networks to cult to news to movies and television across every major device category and business model. So excited to be here today.
Thanks, Eunice. Thanks, Erik. And for those of you that don't know, Direct Agents, we've been very active in the OTT space for the last 7 years and work with a number of SVODs and AVODs. So this is an area we follow closely, and we have active clients now that have seen tremendous growth. That some have had to pivot strategy, so it's something that's close to us as well. Erik, maybe you can start us off. Let us know what you're seeing out there. What are I just mentioned a couple high level stats, but what else are you seeing? What are some of the things fundamentally changing in entertainment these last, especially since the crisis started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So. I think if you kind of look at traditional media, cable virtual MVPDs, and other platforms, clearly, as well as subscription, are all seeing a surge in consumption. We're seeing that at our own company. I was just reviewing my unique users are up 29% month over month since this started. My minutes consumed are up almost 40%. So, and I've talked to a lot of peers in the industry, and we're seeing that same level of pretty dramatic increases in consumption. I think the one big thing that we're all facing and a challenge is, of course, is going to be monetization. While subscription, I think, continues to grow, as you see from the Disney numbers and others. I would say there are some prevailing winds as it relates to the ad-supported business, and we can go into that in more depth. I do think programmatic and addressable connected TV remain extremely strong and bullish areas, just due to tactical shifts into those segments. So I think we're going to continue to see growth there. It may be more measured growth than we saw in Q4, and certainly, is going to be impacted in Q2 here. But I still think long-term for the year, we're going to see positive growth out of that segment.
Great. Thanks, Erik. We had our final panelist, slightly late arrival, Rob. Do you want to just give a quick introduction on yourself?
Sure. Rob Aitken, Managing Director at Deloitte Consulting in the Strategy Group. And I oversee our sell-side advertising offerings. That's working with the media companies and some telcos with media aspirations.
Great, thanks, Rob. Eunice, do you want to follow up with Erik? What do you, from talking to your clients, what are you seeing out there?
Well, I think one major impact has been the shutdown of productions. So with a lot of the streaming services focused on original productions, and not just the streaming services, anyone who creates content and distributes content, they're being impacted. So there is a reshuffling of programming, Obviously, companies like Peacock have been hit significantly because of the Olympics coverage and content not going to be available when they are planning to launch. So there's a lot of shuffling of programming, a lot of reassessing when originals may be available and how that's going to impact overall content merchandising and the approach to overall retention.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot of companies are leaning heavier into animated series because that's something that where production can still go on remotely. Have you had any discussions around that with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think animation and things that are heavily computer generated content is favorable right now. There's also a lot of already canned, reality type of programming that it has is available and that companies are looking to leverage, and at the same time I think it's a topic of how do you continue even from a live standpoint, whether it's shows like the evening shows like the evening talk shows or the Ellen show, things like that, how they're going to be able to come together and create content. The other area that's been heavily impacted is obviously sports in the music industry, anything around live. And experiential was having a huge heyday and had reached a lot of momentum and was continuing pre-COVID days, a lot of momentum. But with a lot of the cancellation of tours, a lot of cancellation of festivals, a lot of cancellation, obviously, of professional sports, it's had a massive impact and flowing beyond just those initial teams and companies that are in those sweet spots, but it's also those companies that support them, whether it's craft services, post-production, event coordination, event producers.
Sure. Rob, what are you seeing on the sales side? What changes your clients facing?
Specific to COVID?
Yep.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. From a media perspective and trying to sell inventory, it's pretty dire right now. There's been a lot of pullback from the brands and the agencies, obviously, and I think they're struggling. I mean, and it's a number of ways. So if they're more focused on traditional video or TV, the whole upfronts process has been really postponed to a certain degree. And that's going to have implications throughout the entire year. Scatter is going to be much bigger this year because of that, but the dollars that they would secure early in the year aren't going to be there, or they're going to be delayed. So that's going to have impact to the media company, and that just in general, demand isn't what it once was, and hopefully that's going to come back in the next few weeks or a few months, but it's going to have some pretty big impacts for media companies, especially those that have a more traditional focus, TV, print, magazines. I think they're all going to be hit pretty hard by this.
Right. So I think across the board, the situation is fairly dire. But I do want to, pivot us to some future trends and hopefully some silver linings, so our attendees can see what's coming up and maybe find opportunities for their own businesses. Anyone want to kick us off? What do they think comes next? Who are some winners and losers out of all this? Like, what are some new business models that we see emerge?
I'm happy to jump in. Josh, you and I have talked about this before from a OTT perspective or video perspective, or even just media perspective, that it starts with the consumers and how they or viewers and how they consume video. And there's always been a couple different use cases. You have something that's passive, you sit back and you just want to engage, you want to be introduced to new content. You have something that's active, where I buy an album, I want to listen to this song, I rent this video and I want to watch that particular movie right now. That doesn't change, right? And the experiences that we have to date don't really serve both of those. They're really good with active, or they're really good with passive. They don't do both. And what we've seen in the music industry with Pandora and Spotify is they've taken those use cases, combined them again. They've had incredible success. But what happened in that process is the economics from a content creator perspective decreased pretty significantly. And the number of players that service that industry also consolidated. So I think we're going to see the same thing that happens in video. And I think COVID is going to accelerate a lot of that. So So how this might play out is you're going to see a combination of all the different video models in one platform. So you'll see EST, which is electronic sell-through. You'll see subscription, you'll see AVOD, and then you'll see rental. And you've already started to see that. And organizations that are well positioned to draw content from all the different windows as they continue to collapse and can introduce offerings that appeal to the entire household. So that's across generations, across content types, and now can go across windows because they serve those different business models, are going to be well positioned to succeed. And so that's how I kind of see this playing out. I think COVID is going to accelerate all that, and there's going to be it'll be a land of a handful of very, very big players with significant content libraries and deep pockets to go ahead and do customer acquisition. And I think then there'll be a lot of smaller niche players with specific genre offerings that are that may struggle to try and gain attention. I mean, there'll be winners there too, but I think media will become a landscape of fewer players that are much, much larger. I think that trend is going to continue.
Yeah. I want to kick it over to Erik, who I think is probably in the more in the niche side, but you guys are probably well positioned at Cinedigm to take advantage of some of those trends that Rob mentioned. How are you guys seeing the future, the next 6 months, the next 12 months?
Yeah, well, I think, we're going to see a lot of the trends that, have been already afoot. The decline of the theatrical business, the decline of packaged home entertainment are, if anything, going to be accelerated. Cord cutting will continue to be accelerated at an even greater pace. I think I saw early this week, AT&T, DirecTV revising down their subscriber counts, reflecting what could be ostensibly an 8% decline this year. Those were numbers that a year ago would have scared anyone, and are now sort of par for the course. And I think those kind of trends are going to continue to accelerate. Thus, I think we're going to see, as the audience shifts, this defiance of gravity of rising CPMs with declining viewership on linear television, between this shift and the loss of sports, the loss of a lot of sponsor dollars, could break the back of that trend pretty dramatically. I think I saw the Magna reforecast post-COVID showing 15% declines or more in linear television advertising dollars growth this year. That's huge, given once again, even with declining audiences, there's still been incremental growth year on year. I think that trend is over. So obviously advertisers have to shift to where the eyeballs are. So I think you're going to see a flight to more OTT inventory. So the challenge there is going to be the big companies are also they're not just standing by idly here. They are. I saw somebody called it burning the boats and accelerating. Their abandonment of some of the linear TV piece. You look at what Hulu's doing with FX. I think you're going to see a lot more of those kinds of tactics happen over the next 24 months. And lastly, I think as it pertains to operators or companies that are focused on a specific vertical or niche. One of the limitations of the old cable model was just there weren't enough spaces on the dial to accommodate all of these channels. And most of these companies abandoned really niche strategies in favor of chasing mass audiences. If you look at what happened with A&E networks, if you look at and other, Discovery, they've really kind of moved towards a bigger mass audience and kind of abandoned the niches. But I think there's still a robust and vibrant opportunity for companies in that space. It's clearly a different level of opportunity. But I think, as it relates to the subscription and ad-supported side of the business, there are demonstrated winners in that space. If you look at Acorn, if you look at Crunchyroll, on the ad-supported side, you look at players like Cheddar, part of the Altice News Group, and others. There's real models to drive real revenue without trying to be a general entertainment service. It takes an incredible amount of focus and skill to do it, but I think it can be done.
Great. Eunice, can you talk us through what shifts you see coming up? Like, how do people think differently about their strategy moving forward?
Right. Specifically in the streaming world, I think up until this point, it was all about content, right? Who has the biggest content budgets? How are we going to use content as our key content, customer acquisition strategy? Our content's going to be our key customer retention strategy. And I think the big shift that almost needed to happen, but also with this perfect storm of, every competitor coming to the market within a 6-month window of time, with an influx of content consumption, right? And just given, obviously, everyone being at home, content consumption has skyrocketed, which is great. And just given the economic situation around the world, I think we're going to see a lot more free or a lot more ad-based services being pushed forward, even beyond paid subscription. But even as the numbers increase, that's great. It's a phenomenal opportunity because now you have kind of cracked the nut on customer acquisition. You've, with CPMs down, you're able to do a lot more performance marketing, which is fantastic. And it's a great way to get people in the door. The biggest challenge is how do you keep people coming back? Even with a lot of these free subscriptions, 90-day trials with Quibi, or your deals with Verizon or T-Mobiles of the world, that you're going to be able to get access to some of these services. So it's great you have these people. So as a streaming service, how are you going to show up to your customer? And from my perspective, the focus needs to shift from content, which has been the focus to date, to customer. So how are you coming up to them? Like, what's your voice? How are you differentiated in a world where there's so much content to access and you have a plethora of choices to go to? Who's going to stand out to you in a way that's going to be engaging and something that's different and someplace that you're going to want to go back to time and time again? And if content isn't going to be the massive differentiator, your experience to that end consumer is. So I think for a lot of these streaming services, it's a phenomenal time to take a look at the way that consumers are showing up. Who's showing up? How are they engaging? How much time are they spending? What type of content are they watching? And the amount of insights you can get to understand who your consumers are and to really further develop that direct-to-consumer relationship will be a differentiator in retention. Because after these 90-day free trials are up, right, or after your year free subscription to Disney Plus is up because you're a Verizon customer, et cetera, are you going to come back and pay and be willing to pay? And that's going to be really when I think we're going to see the people who are winners and perhaps losers in this situation. So we're really not going to see it maybe for about another 6 months to a year. However, I think the way that consumers find attachment and engagement and loyalty to these services will be really a great opportunity during this time.
Great. I'll throw this out to anyone in the group. Any predictions? Any interesting combinations of companies? Anything new from, say, even from the international side that we see, different models coming in? I think we have somewhat of a clean slate, in a lot of these business models. So what do we see coming up?
I think we're going to see a lot more tiered offerings, right? So there's going to be a lot more free with ads and a way to get people in the door. And I think there's going to be a lot more tiered pricing that's available across the board and also internationally. Beyond the US and in different territories, you have a lot of services where the same type of cable service is a different economic model than it is here in the United States. So I think to get people to be able to come onto these services, they're going to have to learn with different pricing that makes sense. So I think we're going to see a lot of creativity and testing that goes out across the board.
This is Erik. I think we will continue to see consolidation. Obviously in the middle of a downturn, which looks like we may be experiencing due to COVID. There's going to be on the flip side for larger companies a lot of bargains, a lot of a lot of opportunities to acquire other companies at lower valuations. And in turn, there may be a lot of companies that are struggling financially that need to partner up to survive. I think, you look at the exhibition business, that's definitely an area where I think we're going to see a pretty dramatic changing of the guard there, just for its own survival. And that's going to have big implications on release windows. If that, especially as you see consolidation happening, I've seen on Twitter a lot of chatter today about, just given Disney starting to get to some scale here, at what level does it start to be a realistic scenario for them to tier up to a premium price point and day and date Marvel movies and other big movies. So that's something that, it's a lot of conjecture now that wasn't even, realistically was several years off. The fact that we're having these conversations now just shows just how dramatically the landscape is shaping. But if anything, it's an opportunistic situation for companies that are well poised to take advantage of it.
Rob, any predictions? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Two quick predictions. One on the traditional video side. I think this is we're completing the first wave of mergers and acquisitions, and there'll be another wave. But given the changes in capital markets and so forth, and access to capital, and some of the performance with companies like Viacom, CBS recently, I'm not sure what that next wave is going to look like. It could be some divestitures, it could be some M&A activity, but I think we're going to go from it was the big 9 plus the independents when you looked at the cable networks and the broadcasters, and that number is going to whittle down to maybe to 4 or 5, and I think we're at about maybe 6 or 7. So that happens, and then on the digital side, I think what's old is new, and what I mean by that is I do think we're going to reconvene at the big screen, and we'll do that through both live linear offerings and what I call active offerings. So I think that customer experience is going to be like a Spotify, Pandora type experience in the big screen, connected TV, but could be on an iPad, could be on a mobile device, and so forth. So, I think, and what's important about that last piece is I think the role of the distributor or the platform will become more prominent and important, but the players who sit in that space will likely be different than the traditional MVPDs. And what I mean by that is it could be the OEM, so Samsung or a device manufacturer like Roku, companies like Whirl, you're starting to hear about more and more, and they play an interesting role in sort of piecing all these pieces together. So it's functionally, it'll look like the old model, content creator, distributor, et cetera. But I think the actual players might be some different names.
Sure. And for my predictions, I mean, I think, one thing is that, that I think there's gonna be a lot of combinations, everything you guys described of different, like the big players reimagining themselves and picking up some of the smaller guys. But I think consumer behavior has shifted quite a bit. Like, I think one thing that has happened, it's made these kind of things, right? Like a virtual business meeting normal. Anyone with children, education has become, the doors of online learning have opened up, much faster than what, we would have just seen from kind of organic growth. So, and then, yes, and that's not just children, right? Individuals, right? Think about how many, maybe in your companies or yourselves are doing things, learning an instrument on, by video or any other class. So I think like, I don't have the answer, but maybe 6 months, a year from now, it could be interesting to see how companies combine that, take advantage of some of those trends with, bringing in traditional entertainment sources, right? So that kind of that new like live at home element. One of our colleagues talked about Patreon, how there's just this explosion of like direct consumer entertainers now, right? And they're being supported directly by their fans, right? So it'd be interesting to see how media companies can aggregate some of that and combine that streaming plus that new live at home, whether it's learning or experiences or conferences or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think we're about out of time. So I want to just thank everyone for joining. Eunice, Erik, and Rob, thank you for your time. For our attendees, we'll be jumping off, and the next session will be with our SVP or our VP of Search to talk about Bright Edge and share a voice, and we'll have Jesse Nowak from Bright Edge joining for that. So that's just going to be in 5 more minutes, and you'll get the links in your chat, and you'll also get an email. But thanks everyone else. Thanks. Great chatting with you guys. We should reconvene in a few weeks or a month and see if some of our predictions are right, or we have to kind of start over because the whole world is moved in a different direction.